aft end of the ship to guide it along the rocks.
Can your old bones handle this jump, or do I need to carry you?
Kudaka spat at Yoritomo's feet and leapt off the rocks. Yoritomo followed, landing hard and rolling across the deck. Kudaka landed moments before him, as lightly as if stepping off a wagon. The two approached Byoki, loyal crewmate and steady hand, who had expertly guided the ship in their absence. "Where's Lin Mei?" Byoki asked. "And what are we going to do about the Breakwater Gate? They're already shutting it. We'll never get there in time."
Just keep us off the rocks, cousin, and make all possible speed.
Yoritomo clapped loyal Byoki on the shoulder.
Lin Mei has the gate covered.
Kudaka stood behind them, looking out over the fantail of the bitter wind, communing with the kami warring across the inlet. She looked stronger now that she was back on the water. Yoritomo placed a hand gently on her back, not wanting to interrupt her arranged fingers, and mumbled prayers. The inlet waters were choppier than they should be, like a long strip of spiked armor. Kudaka looked up at Yoritomo, her eyes wide in fear. A moment later the mountain roared like a tiger. Arcs of orange and black erupted from its peaks. Boulders and sprays of lava rained down like a volley of fiery arrows. The water crashed and sprayed in front of the ship as boulders the size of castles slammed into the inlet and filled it with smoke, fire, and stone. Through the haze, the sky glowed like a grim sunset.
"Kudaka!"
Yoritomo shouted for her as the ship lurched beneath him. Without visibility, the ship caromed off the new rocky navigation hazards, knocking crew off their feet and chipping the hardened wood of the hull. Kudaka turned and gestured wildly in the hopes of catching the attention of some kami, any kami, but none answered. The crew was struggling to regain their feet. They looked scared. Whatever Kudaka was trying to do, it wasn't working fast enough.
"Hull teams below!"
Yoritomo shouted his orders with the unquestionable authority of command.
"Mainsail at full, douse the rest!"
The crew snapped out of their fear at the sound of his voice and attended Yoritomo's orders. He leapt up the aft mast where he hoped to get above the haze and call down bearings. From his elevated position, Yoritomo could see the gate, already a third of the way shut. It was still perhaps 3 times as far as Yoritomo could shoot an arrow. Lin Mei needed to hurry. The ship shuddered as it bounced off another rock, and Yoritomo nearly lost his grip. He scanned what he could see of the water. If they kept to the left, they would soon be out of the rocks and haze.
"Byoki, 30 degrees to port!"
Yoritomo shouted below. The bitter wind veered at his command under Byoki's dutiful hand. Then the mountain erupted again. A stream of lava clawed through the air toward the ship, and briefly all Yoritomo could see were red streaks above him.
"Get below! Everyone get below now!"
He repositioned himself, taking cover behind the mast as molten slop peppered the deck and blistering vapor filled the air. A swirl of wind around Kudaka blasted away the acrid smoke. She was safe, and now Yoritomo could see clearly. The ship was running free, with no hand on the tiller. The molten fire had speckled the deck, and the mainsail was aflame. Screams of the men and women that hadn't made it to cover filled Yoritomo's ears. He knew what he had to do, so he grabbed a line and rappelled back to the deck. But a spray of orange filled his field of vision, and his face exploded in pain. The line snapped, and Yoritomo slammed into the deck, clutching his face as agony overwhelmed him. Byoki shouted for his captain, emerging from the relative safety below. Kudaka splashed a bucket of water in Yoritomo's face, and the thin line of lava on his right side steamed and fell away. He wiped away the flaky crust and tried to blink away the pain within his head. The skin felt tight and numb, and his vision was blurred.
"How bad is it?"
You just got a little prettier.
Kudaka helped him to his feet.
Will you live?
Yoritomo grimaced, but nodded. Kudaka took the burned rope from his hand.
Good. I'll tend to that later. Your wife will kill you if you don't make it out of here. Back to it, Captain.
The fresh scar only made Yoritomo's grin the fiercer. Still burning, the ship finally emerged from the haze, but they had been thrown off course and were careening toward the side of the inlet. If someone didn't get on that tiller immediately, they'd be wrecked. It swung freely like an angry serpent covered in flames.
"All hands return to your stations. Fire teams, get water on the tiller. Douse the mainsail before we lose it and give me full on the rest."
Byoki snatched up Kudaka's empty bucket and dashed away to refill it. But Yoritomo knew there wasn't time to wait. He leapt across the cooling lava, narrowly avoiding a searing fate as he grabbed the long end of the tiller and heaved with all his might. Willing himself to ignore the searing pain on his palms, he leaned inward, leveraging his entire body to straighten the ship. But the rudder would not budge. Yoritomo yelled with pain and effort, setting his entire self, ambition and pride and cunning and all the rest, against the rebellious current. The tiller moved. The ship began to straighten, but then the ship hit a rock, and Yoritomo's feet slipped along the deck. For a moment, the tiller began to shift back to follow the current. The rocky wall loomed large before them, but as his hands bled on the tiller, another pair joined them. Byoki set his grip alongside his captain's, and their flesh burned together. Then another pair of hands, and another.
It's not over yet!
Yoritomo's shout was as much for himself as for his crew. He took a deep breath and pushed his focus past the noise of the desperate crew behind him. He took one step, defying the smug lion, crane, phoenix, and even scorpion samurai that had stood over him, mocking the mantis, telling him he was not worthy. He defied the assassins that took his family, the impostor he had called father for years. He defied those who impugned his people's honor. Driven on by his crew's devotion, he forced the tiller to bend to his will. He defied all those who had stood in his way and had told him what couldn't be done. Then he had a vision of Lin Mei, a brief image of his wife nursing a child while studying an old book. Yoritomo grunted with exertion as he took the final step toward her, and the tiller steadied. The ship pointed toward the breakwater gate once again. Kudaka returned with wetted blankets to smother the remaining fires on the tiller, while fresh soldiers relieved those who had been straining with Yoritomo. The captain's legs collapsed, and he sat on the deck in a momentary heap of exhaustion. He stared at his hands, blackened and burnt, and felt the scar newly seared across his face. He made tight fists, letting the pain feed his will to live, to see the mantis elevated. "Cousin, we near the breakwater," Yoki shouted. Yoritomo took a breath and stood. The gate was nearly closed, and would lock long before they reached it. Monks lit their arrows and nocked them, rows of tiny flames like candles at a shrine. They'd be in range within moments.
Lengthen those sails. I want us making all possible speed.
"Cousin, what about the gate?" Byoki was genuinely concerned. "Perhaps we could turn back to a cave, wait out the eruption."
Lin Mei is coming.
Yoritomo stood and watched the breakwater grow larger. He could make out the details of individual monks' faces now with his eye that wasn't swollen shut. The gate was seconds from closing when the inlet was suddenly filled with 1,000 ear-piercing shrieks. A black cloud erupted from the side of the mountain and stretched toward the breakwater, moving too fast to be smoke. The crew collectively gasped. "Kudaka, what is that?" Byoki pointed to the unnatural black cloud.
Not my place to say.
Kudaka shrugged, turning her attentions back to the water.
That is my wife.
Yoritomo smiled so hard he felt the skin crack over his right cheek. She was magnificent. Their children would surely rule all of Rokugan. Byoki stared at him in surprise. The cloud that was not smoke lashed out like a whip, expanding, contracting, twisting, turning. It streamed over the breakwater gate, and monks cried out and leapt into the inlet waters to avoid it. It screeched through the sky like a million doomed, angry souls. Bats. Then Byoki gasped in recognition. "Ekomori!"
Yes.
Yoritomo laughed, all his pain forgotten.
Like in the stories, the yokai who helped our ancestor Kaimetsu Uo first survive on the islands.
The gate was now cleared of monks, so the bats that had driven them off dissipated back into the surrounding rocks. All except for amidships, low on the deck, where a thick swarm of the creatures swirled like a waterspout. Yoritomo grabbed a scorched blanket off the tiller and entered the cloud. When the bats dispersed, Yoritomo stood there, his arms around his wife. The crew were terrified, but still had the sense to be grateful for the woman that had made possible their escape. "Brace for impact!" Byoki shouted. Yoritomo grabbed a line and held onto his wife. The bitter wind smashed into the unlocked gate. The ship shuddered, but the gate opened. They were free. A great cheer rang out among the crew.
Lin Mei,
Yoritomo started, brushing a stray hair from her face.
I was wrong to conduct our business with Damayanté without your counsel.
Lin Mei looked away, toward the south. Yoritomo put his forehead to hers.
It won't happen again. I swear it.
Lin Mei looked back to him and raised an eyebrow. Yoritomo's eyes were full of mischief.
After all, how are you going to prove you're half the negotiator I am if all the business is left to me?
Lin Mei pulled Yoritomo's mouth to hers and kissed him.
You know, the mantis female eats the head of the male after mating.
Kudaka offered. Yoritomo was grinning. They were going to make it out alive. Most of them, anyway.
Let's get some wind in our sails, Kudaka.
It ain't over yet.
A mournful wail filled the inlet behind them, though Yoritomo couldn't tell if it was a horn from the monk's village or the mountain itself as it raged to the heavens. Then a deep, resounding, earth-splitting crack echoed from below. Yoritomo watched as the rate of passing shore slowed, stopped, and then, impossibly, began moving backward.
Kudaka?
Yoritomo hoped he was wrong. Her eyes went wide.
Maelstrom!
We need wind!
Heaving on a line to open his sails more fully.
Lengthen those sails. Keep us ahead of the tide.
The bitter wind's sails billowed outward as Kudaka's powers filled them, countering the backward pull of the whirlpool. The ship crept forward slowly. Yoritomo and Lin Mei worked as one mind, trimming sails and turning them to catch the most wind, trying desperately to hang on against the current dragging them towards certain doom. Byoki manned the tiller, keeping them as stable as any man could as the sea rose against them. Even the mainsail, pocked with holes from lava spray, did its part. For long minutes they labored, the landmarks to either side of the ship, unmoving. The wail sounded again. The trees shook and the rocks tumbled. Then the current shifted, and the bitter wind shot forward like an arrow from a bow. A cheer ended early when the ship grazed a rock formation, then another rock. They were moving far too fast to avoid all the hazards. Yoritomo's orders were swallowed up by the sounds of trees snapping and water rushing. Yoritomo looked behind him. He couldn't see the island. The water behind him was higher than his ship.
Tsunami!
Yoritomo yelled over the roar of water.
Trim those sails. Set storm conditions. Extend the lee boards.
As Yoritomo repeated his instructions, Lin Mei secured a line to him, herself and Kudaka. The Tenkinja whispered a prayer to the gods of the sea that they would make it safely home. When the wave passed under them, it tossed and pitched the bitter wind as if it were made of paper. The ship bobbed in the pit behind the wave, sinking until Yoritomo's ears popped. His stomach flipped until he felt sick. Then they were rising, so fast even his experienced sea legs ached just standing upright. Then the sea finally flattened out, and they were in the bay of black water, the island already small behind them. Even the mountain seemed half its size it had been mere moments ago. A thin whisker of smoke at its nose and glowing stripes of lava along its sides made it seem like a tiger, one they had barely escaped with their lives. Yoritomo stood next to Kudaka on the fantail, and the pair watched the horizon.
That wave couldn't make landfall, could it, Kudaka?
Hard to say. Ain't ever easy to see what your actions will do. It's like trying to see the ripples from a stone thrown in choppy water. And you like to toss boulders.
Lin Mei went to Yoritomo, and he held her tight. After a long moment, she broke the embrace to trace the edges of the burn down his right eye and cheek. He gave her a crooked smile. He hoped the scar was as dashing as he imagined. It certainly felt horrific. Lin Mei then opened his satchel and removed the jade disc. She flattened the map out, laid the disc over it, and angled it to catch the light. Filtered through the specific red of the unique jade, entirely new symbols and images appeared. As Kudaka joined them over the map, a new puzzle was unfolding. Together, they would solve these puzzles and unlock the secrets of all 11 realms. And next, who knows? Perhaps they will even complete their quest to raise the mantis and join the great clans of Rokugan.
The children sitting near the bench sat in silence for a moment. But the moment passed, and one burst forth with a question, breaking the dam for the rest.
How much did it hurt to get burned?
Didn't Yoritomo get his scar dueling Umineko?
Where is the red jade disc now?
The children's eyes shone with excitement. Byoki, spun the platter he had been holding up as the red jade disc and pantomimed casting it into the sea, rocking it back and forth gently as it sank beneath the invisible waves.
We lost it when we fought the sea spider. Kudaka threw it into its eye to blind it, remember? It fell into the whirlpool, sinking with the monster. I expect it's still down there, a treasure waiting for some new hero to find it. Maybe that'll be you. Now get about your chores.
The children dispersed in a babbling crowd, and Lin Mei approached Byoki.
That was quite a tale you spun for the children. They'll be asking to see me turn into a cloud or a bat for days, you know, and I won't thank you for that.
Byoki smiled, rubbing the flame scar on his palm.
Well, they need these kinds of stories. Sets the fire in their bellies. Makes them want to find their own treasure. Deck Sweeper doesn't become a captain in a year. A bunch of pirates don't become a samurai clan in a decade. And it's easy to get too comfortable along the way. Even our champion loves a good tale to remind him what he's chasing. After all, we can't disgrace the memory of everyone who didn't make it by getting lazy now, can we?
A Discerning Eye and an Unyielding Resolve by Tyler Parrott. Read by Jeannie Calvar. I understand you have something you wish to show us. The door slid shut behind Kitsuki Chiari. The investigator bowed to the Ruby Champion and sat. Tea steamed between them, yet Agasha Sumiko seemed to take no notice of it, and Chiari paid it no mind. Only Kitsuki Yuruma, sitting to Sumiko's right, acknowledged its existence by pouring some for himself as he watched the younger woman settle onto her knees before the regent's chief enforcer. At first, only the quiet padding of feet on the lacquered floor answered Sumiko's statement. Chiari waited as the warrior who had closed the door behind her, renowned Hatamoto Miramoto Hitomi, returned to the Ruby Champion's side. Unlike Ambassador Yuruma, who comfortably waited Chiari's report, Hitomi wore her swords openly and remained standing. Chiari had not requested Hitomi's presence for this meeting, but the clear threat of a trained duelist indicated that Sumiko was taking Chiari's testimony quite seriously. Since Chiari had first informed Yuruma of the importance of her testimony, the emptiness in her stomach had only grown. Either the testimony would dismantle the very legitimacy of the Emerald Empire, or she would be quietly removed from her post, never to be seen again. Lord Justikar Goro had always taught her that nothing mattered except the truth. Yet Agasha Sumiko served Regent Bayushi Shoju, a Bayushi who had a tenuous relationship with the truth at best. Kitsuki Chiari swallowed and reached into her obi, withdrawing a small scroll tied with a crimson ribbon. 3 things, Agasha-sama, Chiari said. 2 are but testimony, while the 3rd can be read in this message from Lord Yogo to Bayushi Shoju. Hitomi and Yuruma both looked to the scroll with interest, while Sumiko watched Chiari's expression. The intensity in the Ruby Champion's eyes bore down upon her, daring her to hesitate or retreat. Chiari did not move, yet her heart beat swiftly. Her discovery could be presented to no one else. Only Agasha Sumiko could act upon what Chiari had learned. Steeling herself, She met Sumiko's gaze unflinchingly. Yaruma reached forward to take the scroll. While he read, Sumiko spoke. "And what is it you have uncovered?" "The truth about His Excellency, the late Hante," Chiari replied. "I'm afraid our esteemed regent has not been entirely truthful." Sumiko's brows furrowed in response. "I suggest you choose your words carefully, Kitsuki-san." Chiari breathed